Up until only a couple of generations ago, our ancestors relied upon both specialized and common medicinal plant knowledge.
Oregon grape is the more commonly used name, and it's all in the roots. The berberine in here kills both gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria.
Some of us today are lucky enough to have been introduced to herbal traditions in our upbringing.
So you have Shigella and E. coli, Campylobacter, quite a list of them. This kills all of those organisms without hurting your intestinal flora, so it's kind of magical in that sense.
In North America, we've largely lost that generation of knowledge.
Stinging nettle.
But the World Health Organization estimates that 80% of the world's population uses herbal medicine for some aspect of their primary care today.
Take these roots after you peel the outer bark off to about a 3-inch section of root in a cup of water.
Across the country, ethnobotanists and herbalists are stewarding these ancient connections.
This is celandine, and it's good for digestion. It's also good for skin cancer things.
You know, I kind of came by this naturally. I didn't grow up and then seek information on herbal medicine. I spent a good number of my summers as a little kid with my grandfather. And he grew up in southern Poland in the mountains, and it was just traditional there. I'd hold a bag and he'd collect plants and throw them in there, and I saw him use them, and it was just what you did. I interview a lot of Native Americans, and they talk about that a lot. Your grandparents teach them things.
Herbal medicine on this Farm to Fork, Wyoming.
Production of Farm to Fork, Wyoming is made possible with the generous support of the Wyoming Business Council Agribusiness Division and viewers like you. Thank you.
In the archaeological record, knowledge of powerful plant medicines goes back as far as 60,000 years. Ancient cuneiforms have revealed pharmacopoeias, some listing over 250 medicinal plants, many of which are still traditionally used today. Yet, in the context of conventional medicine, herbalism seems an imperfect relic from a superstitious past. But is it really?
I think regardless of where you come from around the world, you want your stuff to work. And so I think for any medicine to stand the test of time, it has to work a certain amount. You know, it has to be able to solve the majority of whatever that culture's problems are.
What's interesting is populations with old traditions on every face of the planet were using similar plants in the same plant families for the same chemical components. They knew exactly how these plants worked, and they knew how to prevent disease if it was disease that they were exposed to over a period of time.
Having started out in biochemistry, John's work as a biologist has led him on a lifelong study of animal and plant relationships.
I have a special interest in how humans came to know medicines and how they work, really, because that has something to do with how we evolved over time. But I was always collecting plants since I was a little kid.
John's interest in plants led him to the first of many conversations with tribal healers.
The first healer I'd studied with was a Jemez Pueblo woman who was quite old, but she really knew plants. And this is when I was young. I was in my 20s, and I'd go up and see her on all my days off and take notes. Then I came out to Wyoming in the 60s, 1964, and was fascinated with the Indian cultures here because it was so tied to this land that is so diverse.
John was drawing from a deep well of plant knowledge in the Americas.
It was as technically sophisticated, I think, as the medicine we have today.
The first herbal record, Out of the New World, recorded in 1552, described nearly 200 plants used by the Aztecs alone.
And Europe had a very old, respected tradition of using medicinal plants. But they also learned a lot from the native people.
Each following century of exploration revealed more Native American plant wisdom possessed by tribes throughout the Americas.
I mean, malaria was a huge problem with the first settlers that came here. You don't hear much about it. The current drug for malaria is artemisinin. Well, that was the active principle in the sagebrush that the Indians used. Pretty much all of the Indians knew about it and used it to prevent this sickness that we call malaria and other parasitic diseases. They were doing the same thing in China. The plant that looks almost identical, it's in the same family, same genus, different species, both have the same chemical in them. It's a lactone glycoside that kills parasites.
Studies today are pointing out some of the benefits of our
nitrolicide,
ancestors'
which is
wild
the cyanide
plant
sugar,
diets.
into the sugar part and the cyanide part, hydrogen cyanide. But not to worry, every cell of your body produces an enzyme called rhodinase that neutralizes the hydrogen cyanide so you don't die. And all of that chemistry is there to tell us that these plants, these seeds in the rose family, were part of human evolution on this planet, and we're already producing the enzymes we need to eat this stuff and deal with it as a nutrient. Most of the bioflavonoids and the things we call antioxidants, we're just learning now about those and how critical they are. They were normally in high levels in the primitive diets of all people around the world. With sustained high yield agriculture, they disappeared. And all of a sudden people turn up with diseases that seem to be cured by medicines we call antioxidants. Really, the philosophy I endorse with medicinal plants is mostly food is medicine, and when you take a medicine, you're either supplementing a food source you weren't getting, or you're getting around a condition that was caused by a lack of some food source that would have been in a primitive human diet.
I think it's sort of important to also understand that plant medicine is a spectrum. And so you have a spectrum of what I think of very food-like substances. I mean, as much as think of garlic, which we add to food, but also has lots of antimicrobial properties, to plants that are very drug-like, like kava kava or even foxglove, which is where digitalis is derived from, and digitalis is a heart medication. Along that spectrum, I think we need to relearn as a society kind of that more nutritive side of plant medicine. How do you support a body to heal itself? Because there are plants that do all that. There's even a plant that historically that will actually heal and repair a heart valve. And so I think plants offer a unique opportunity for that.
Most of the medicines are in the roots. Some are in berries. You shouldn't eat juniper berries if you have kidney disease, but it's a treatment. Juniper berries are a treatment for kidney infections because juniperine is an oil in here that kills bacteria and persists through the digestive process and comes out in the urines.
Herbal traditions even employed preventative plant medicines.
The standard herb for treating calcium recycling issues is this plant, equisetum or horsetail. Looks like a horse's tail. So it's a treatment for osteoporosis and injuries where you need to build back bone tissue.
Native North Americans looked to the Hawthorne Berry to help with the aging process.
Virtually all of the problems associated with old age were treatable with Hawthorne berries. And now we know that there's this magic antioxidant in Hawthorne berries called OPC, oligomeric proanthocyanid, and that strengthens capillaries. It prevents capillaries from becoming weak and leaking. Macular degeneration has to do with a failing heart, which has to do with blood flow no longer at optimum levels. And OPC is used to treat arrhythmias and strengthen a heart after myocardial infarction, where you have a weakness in the heart that needs to be built back up. Capillary fragility is involved in all sorts of aging symptoms. And they knew that for old people, you have to have Hawthorne in your diet.
Another thing I think is also unique about plants is that you're not talking about a single isolated chemical. So like most medications is a single compound that has one effect. Versus like, if you're thinking about with plant medicine, you have multiple compounds. And so it may actually be the effect of multiple compounds acting in unison is why you have the particular effect that a plant has.
So we call them spin-offs. So salicin is more than just salicylic acid. It has many different variations in the plant, and different willows have different types of variations.
And it also can sometimes allow that plant to have more than one health benefit. You may be able to use it for 2 or 3 what seem like completely different uses. The other thing I like about plant medicine is that it has things in there that will help reduce the effect of something else. So for example, white willow bark, which is basically natural aspirin. And aspirin is known for causing stomach ulcers if you overdo it. But white willow bark actually has a little bit of extra copper in it, which may actually help heal the lining of your GI tract and prevent ulcers from forming.
We are always in Western medicine looking for the active ingredient, the thing that makes that plant powerful, and we take it out and we concentrate it. And a lot of our medicines are based on things that originally may have come with plants. What we failed to realize is that there were probably non-active substances in that plant that may have made that active ingredient less toxic. We have not mastered that. So we concentrate that active ingredient, make it really powerful, but with that we can get more adverse effects, I believe. So I think that plant balance of what's in that plant, nature's pretty good at figuring out.
To take medicine when you are sick is like digging the well only when you're thirsty. Is it not already too late?
Today, there's a movement to bridge our modern disconnect from traditional methods of healing and reconnect with what the plant world has to offer.
Modern medicine, a lot of it was really derived from what we now consider alternative medicine. I mean, you think about 100, 150 years ago, your conventional medical doctor was an herbalist or a homeopath. And so even currently, a lot of drug companies are looking through old historic texts, trying to see what might be the next drug breakthrough.
So what I would say about Western medicine, and which is what I'm trained in as an MD, I think we have lots to offer in acute settings with acute infections, like a bad car accident. We can fix that like no other. We can put people back together. So for acute interventions, we're the best. I think it's a good system. And for people that are really sick, rebalancing them, bringing back from death's doorstep, if you like, with fluids and intensive and measuring closely. But then the chronic problems, whether it's from smoking or alcohol or being overweight or arthritises, were not so good because some of the things that we use, they are symptom suppressors, but they're not really addressing the disease process.
It's this chronic illness burden that is sabotaging the healthcare system. The medications, the expense. So I'm not anti-medication, I'm not anti-vaccine, I'm not only using natural medicines. I think it's really finding the right combination. And medications are very useful when they're needed in acute care, but really for the chronic long-term management of issues, they really have a lot of weaknesses. For example, the diabetes drug causes B12 deficiency in about 60% of people. The statin drugs cause a coenzyme Q10 deficiency, which can lead to depression, dementia, muscle breakdown, and diabetes. So there's a real give and take to know when to use medications, but when to support the body.
Being that we're a country very much into this idea of progression and the new stuff always being better, I think at some point we kind of forgot the old stuff and perhaps the value of the old stuff. And so I think in a way you're sort of having a conflict between kind of the old and the new. And I think we forget that both of them can have value. Penicillin, I mean, there used to be an old wives' trick where you just take moldy bread and put it on a festering wound, and that would get rid of the infection. And so I think we sort of forget that history. And I think we start to look at it as these two separate distinct groups rather than saying that these two groups are actually quite related to each other.
As we begin to confront antibiotic resistance, herbal medicine's arsenal of antimicrobial plants have been offering solutions for some of our more vexing modern diseases, such as Lyme disease.
I think that one of the biggest things that people need to remember about Lyme is, first of all, it's everywhere. You know, that's, I think, we have to take it seriously. It is everywhere, including in Wyoming.
And I had to find that out the hard way by having Lyme disease myself and being told that it doesn't exist. I couldn't have it because I would have had to have gone to an eastern state in order to get Lyme disease, or Northern California.
I think it's going to come out probably within a year or two that this is major, it's an epidemic, and oh no, what are we going to do about it in Wyoming?
As far as I know, I was first case in Wyoming, and I used that to learn about it because I really didn't know anything about Lyme disease.
It's related to the microbe that causes syphilis. It can change shapes out of the spirochete shape into different forms.
It has to do with the type of organism it is. It hides. It's not a normal, ordinary bacteria that you run into in first year microbiology. It's a spirochete, and by nature they lose their protein coat on the outsides.
The immune system can't find it then if it was looking for that protein before.
So that's Lyme disease. It's very, very strange. Borreliosis is about as cryptic as an illness can be as far as symptoms go. By the time I went for treatment, I already gone to stage 2. If you catch stage 1 Lyme disease early enough, you can treat it with doxycycline very efficiently. But once it goes to stage 2, it's not treatable with doxycycline.
Doxycycline is an antibiotic, like many of the other standard drugs for treating Lyme. But with the growing threat of antibiotic resistance, the need for alternatives is growing.
I'm not completely opposed to antibiotics. I just really don't think that's the answer. The CDC has been so clear to tell us that it's the twilight of antibiotics, and I do want them to work when we really need them, and so I don't want to overuse them.
Many see the antimicrobial and antiparasitic plants of our ancestors as a more dynamic solution.
There's just not resistance with these herbs because there's so many different compounds in the herbs that the microbes can't work around them, especially if we have a protocol with more than one. And then the other thing that herbs have in them are different compounds that are supportive. Instead of causing cardiac arrhythmia, which some of the antibiotics do, if we're not careful and using it incorrectly, they might support the heart health.
In John's struggle to overcome Lyme, the conventional pharmaceuticals didn't work.
It continued to get worse over a period of 6 years until I ran into an alternative Chinese practitioner who gave me some Chinese herbs, and it went away in a day. I went from unemployable, could hardly walk, to a day later being completely recovered. So I had tremendous enthusiasm for spreading the word, and I knew of a couple other people with the same symptoms that were also diagnosed as not having Lyme. Their diagnosis was, we don't know what you have. And they also recovered very quickly. And it turns out that the chemistry of the Chinese medicines I was taking also occur here in Native American medicinal plants. So I started asking people when they would call up and say, I hear you've dealt with Lyme disease. Do you have any clues? Usually the first ones I got were people that were actually diagnosed with borreliosis. They responded very quickly to the Chinese herbs, but then I asked a few that were up for experimenting if they would go with some experimental herbs that we can try. Because I was able to suppress my symptoms with Osho Root, which is a very, very popular Native American herb, popular in the sense of all of the tribes know about it and use it for lots of things. We used Osho Root on a couple of people and it seemed to work right away. So that's what I use now because it's cheaper, it's easier to find, and it's native. You don't have to import it. So Osho Root combined with fringed sage, which is equivalent chemically to the Chinese herb. The Latin name is Artemisia annua. And the one we have is Artemisia frigida, and it has the same lactone glycosides in it, which kill parasites. But all of them disappear. You actually kill the organism using Osho Root, which is well known for killing cryptic organisms. It kills pathogenic bacteria and viruses, and there's very few things that kill viruses.
But Osho is a sacred and very long-lived, slow-growing wild plant in need of protection from overharvest.
The Osho was always popular among the Hispanic community here, and the Indians knew about it, and they used that. And then the Anglos found out about it. You know, Mr. Smith in New York wants some, and that was collected mostly like in New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, and it was over-harvested. So there were problem reports that went out with the Forest Service. Hey, we see these huge holes here because if a plant grows, it can grow from, you know, several feet. That'll be one batch, and unscrupulous people would dig that out and then sell the root. And now the plant is even more popular, and that is not getting any better. So a few years ago, we said, let's see if we can grow this Osho here. And there were other voices that said, no, you can't do that, it's impossible, blah, blah, blah. But we just collected the seeds, put them in the ground, and lo and behold, the stuff grows, you know. The germination rate was 20 to 30% the first year. Now this is a smart plant, and the next year more would come up in the same spot, so it has a staggered germination behavior, if you will. So you can grow that really well here.
These are the babies.
But these potent plant medicines come with their own risks.
Osho's been used for a lot of pathogenic infections. But this was a new one, and there's nothing in the literature on it. So I went too high with one woman, and she's killed off her intestinal flora, as you would with Flagyl or a lot of drugs for Giardia. They're very potent drugs. So we took her off of that, and as it turns out, that was enough time.
And so it's also just a question of training and background. You know, that we have to honor the depth of knowledge that's required sometimes to have an healing effect and to not cause harm. So I think, you know, going by, you know, the Hippocratic Oath, we say do no harm first. And if we go into places where we're not well trained without understanding all the innuendo and nuance of plants, we can cause harm. So as can we with our medications if we don't honor and stay humble in the face of their side effects.
There's a kind of a bell-shaped curve with medications and with botanicals, where a little doesn't do much, too much can be toxic, and then there's that sweet spot. And that's where the synergy, if you get 3 of those sweet spots together, you get a 1 + 1 + 1 = 10. And I think finding that is really important.
I don't use an herb unless I've really studied it and understand its mechanism, what are the contraindications, that means why you shouldn't use it, and maybe if you're taking a medication that it could increase the amount of the medication in you or decrease the amount of its effectiveness. You have to understand all that. So I'm pretty careful with the herbs that I use, and I want to make sure that I don't do, you know, any harm.
Problem is, we don't really know how some of the botanicals and the medications play together. For example, St. John's wort, if a young woman is on birth control and she takes St. John's wort decreases the effectiveness of the birth control. And most doctors don't know that. And it doesn't say it on the bottle.
And how plants are sourced, harvested, and handled is another important factor.
Timing is everything. You gotta be there at the right time of year. A plant that's deadly poisonous at some time may be a good food source at a different time. And that's very true of medicinal plants also, that things that are poisonous turn out to be some of the best medicinals. You got to know when to collect it and what the dosage is. And that's in a lot of books now, but when I started doing this it wasn't. But now there are lots of studies done by drug companies and by other people that make it their life's work to analyze these plants for glycosides and alkaloids and resins and all of the things that make up what we call medicines. Only they're in the plants, and knowing when they're at their peak production or what soil they have to grow in order to produce those things, what number of daylight hours are for the production to be optimum. It all plays in, and it's very technical science now. And it's in the literature. There are scientific publications on these plants that I use a lot now because I have to. I work for in coordination with doctors who want to be using some of these things. And I have to back up what I say with peer-reviewed, published research, and that's available now. It wasn't 30 years ago. It's one of the deficiencies we have in our modern society that we don't know, as a society, we don't know about the traditions that were very, very effective in treating disease and keeping people healthy.
So it's a whole generation coming behind me that's very conscious of our environment, our ecosystem, and particularly our food chain. And I think you're going to see that really apply to the botanical use. They're going to really become less reliant on medications, more self-reliant on lifestyle and nutrition, and supporting with things like botanicals.
And I guess that's been my goal for a long time now, is teach classes so that it's done right, because there's a lot of mythology about how plants work as medicines. And a lot of it is not only untrue, but gets people in trouble. These are very potent medicines that can be toxic if taken the wrong way.
And so what we talk a lot about is get rid of the bad stuff and give you more of the good stuff. I mean, at the end of the day, that's really what is the answer. And whether the good stuff is the right medication, the right nutraceutical, the right vitamin, the right botanical, the right Chinese herb, the right Ayurvedic remedy, the right homeopathic remedy, they're all speaking the same language. They're all approaching the system in the same way, just from a different angle.
So it's that kind of collaboration, that kind of openness that I think we all need to find as healthcare professionals.
So whether you believe in the philosophy or not, I think it's important to recognize the experiences, the positive experiences that people have had over time.
This episode of Farm to Fork Wyoming is available for $25. Order online at shop.wyomingpbs.org. This program was produced by Wyoming PBS, which is solely responsible for its content.